Kia ora, Matt. Kia ora, tera. Can you guys hear me? Kia ora, Brent. Hey, Kat. Oh, good. We had a little bit of technology issues where the computer we were trying to use wouldn't interface with a camera, so we're on my phone. We are right next to my router, so I'm really hoping that we're not going to get glitchy quality at all through this like you did from me a little bit last night. So anyway, if it does get glitchy, let me know, and we've got a backup plan. I will abort and then hook in with a Zoom call to Lyndon, and he can broadcast it there because we know that works really well. So yeah. So while you guys are hanging around waiting with me, you could go and pull up the documents that we posted earlier on in the week. They're pinned to the top of this group as an announcement. So that just makes it easier. You don't have to scroll down. You can just go into announcements for the group and you can find them. So all the documents have been put into one. So you have there a code of ministry practice for co-leadership. You have our model of co-leadership, but that basically is our a bit more than draft, but it's our first run at dividing up what Lyndon's current job is between the two of us. So that could be really helpful. I know there's been a couple of questions around that. And then the other document that's there is a theology of co-pastoring, and that document is just us kind of explaining why do it. We talked about that quite a lot last night with George, and I would really encourage you to go and have a look at that video, because George is just amazing. He's an interesting guy to listen to. He really knows his stuff, and he totally just makes the New Testament sound like a really great current story. So if you didn't get to watch that with us last night, go back in and have a look at the video, and particularly, like, even if you don't watch any of the other bits of it, watch what George has to say. Really good. Hey, Sharon. Kia ora, Marcy. Hey, Nikki, how are you? You guys are awesome, all showing up at 7 on the dot, especially when you got little kids to put to bed. So I had great fun trying to record my sermon today. I like to do it outside because I like the sound of the birds and stuff like that, and it was so lovely and quiet. And the second I got outside, people are mowing their lawns, and I gave up. So it's a rather interesting model for Sunday. I just realized I can't actually see the time now that my video is going. Can someone tell me what the time is? Kia ora, Liz. You need background music? Yeah, I know. Once I start talking, you won't need it. 7:01, okay. Well, there's some new people that are in here that I'll put out to you. Have you got any questions that you want me to answer during this chat? Because I can write them down now and get to them a bit later. Oh, Andrew cooked. Awesome. Our Samuel is a very good cook here, so I love it that he can cook a meal from start to finish now without my input, really. At 13 years old is pretty cool. Yeah, so anyone got any questions? Yeah, well, Justin could, but he's in the playroom and I'm in the office with the door shut. can't play the piano quietly, Liz. It's actually a bone of contention at times in our house. Oh, my little friend is at the door. All right. Yeah, I need your slippers. Now, see, my feet are freezing. Come on, come in. Come in. All right, well, I'm going to start. People can watch the start later if they need to. So I thought actually something that's come up quite a bit this week, and oh yeah, thank you, Liz. Oh, that's just what I'm going to cover now. That's perfect. Oh, cool, Nikki. I've got that down. Actually, somebody else has asked me the same thing. That's cool. So, lots of you guys have known me since I first come along to Mandarua Baptist, which is coming up 20 years ago. So, I arrived when Rex Booth was still pastor, and then I think he was only here for like a year while we were there, and then he left. And Justin and I were not together well, we were together, but we were not married. Justin became a Christian while we were in this church, and then we got engaged and we got married, and very quickly had Sammy a year later. And so our babies have been born in this church, and you guys have helped us with meals at those times and all that stuff. So this really, in a lot of ways, feels like our home church. And so in many ways, having a call to leadership within that church has both been, I guess, a natural thing, but it's also been a rather weird thing. I just need to let the cat back out, and now she can stay out. Off you go. From very early on, I used to, actually right back in the days, I used to help run Girls Group, which was our youth group back then. And then I had my own children, and so we set up Wonder Mums together. Actually, Catherine set it up, and I got on board with her real quick with that. And then we did things like Mini Music. I've been on the admin team, and even while doing all of those things and eldership, I never ever thought that I would be training to be a pastor. So this is kind of a bizarre situation to be in a lot of ways. I remember when Mick asked me to go on to eldership at the time, thinking that that was a really huge responsibility and it was scary and I didn't want to do it. And he talked me around. He's very persuasive, and it felt like it wasn't too long after that he started to engage with me about whether or not I felt like there was a pastoral call on my life. And to be perfectly honest, our church, I mean, lots of you guys know we've been through a church split, and that means that you see the underside of pastoring. You see the pain, you see the heartache, and I can honestly say that when I entered into Kerry, a lot of that for me was a total act of obedience. There wasn't a strong desire to do this, and I also I felt really, which I'll get to that. So there wasn't a strong desire to do this. I went with an act of obedience, and while at Kerry studying part-time, it wasn't to go and do pastoring at that point, it was just to be there to study. I really gained a real love for what I was learning, and there was more people to speak into my life. And then Mick resigned and moved on, and I did the interim pastoral leadership during that time. So I mean, lots of you that are watching know this, but there's a few new people to our church who probably don't know my history. So I did the interim pastoral leadership with Dave, and Dave and I worked really well together, and we were not looking like we were finding a pastor anytime soon. And so we sort of started to look, okay, if we don't have someone by the beginning of the year, maybe we're just going to have to tough it out and just do this. And I got my head around that really quickly, and I was really excited about it. And then we hired Lyndon. And I mean, Lyndon knows the story, so it's no surprise to him, but I was gutted. I was gutted because I could see my desire, I guess, to be leading in our church slipping through my fingers. And so I discussed that with Lyndon actually before he even started. I told him how I felt, and that I would absolutely back him, but that he needed to know that this was a sad day for me, really. And also there was some, things like, you better love my church because I think they're awesome. And I think it's a real credit to Lyndon that he was able to handle that level of conversation with, who was I at the time? No one, with utter humility and grace. So that was really cool. And then, so throughout that time, I was speaking to Johnny about trying to get students to help us out before we had Lyndon. So we were like, well, if we're going to be doing this for a while, we will need some backup. And at the end of the conversation, Johnny said to me, have you ever considered that there's a call of God on your life to pastor? And I didn't cry, but I had this really deep sobbing want to well up from inside me. And I looked back fairly quickly on actually, and realized that that was the witness of the Holy Spirit. I went through a really rough year of discernment for myself. Should I not just study theology, but actually should I enter the pastoral leadership track at Carey? And at the end of that year, we made the decision as a family. It was a tough decision for us to make as a family, that I would begin to train as a pastor. And the first year just about killed us, I think. For lots of reasons. When I write an assignment, I had no concept of when I was doing well or not, so I was always writing feeling like I was going to fail, and I never did. But my husband supported me through all of that, and throughout the 3 years, he has actually become more and more supportive. And I think I don't think I could have done that really without his approval, and without his his pride in me has really been a strength. So towards the end of the first year, I was down at our national hui, and we had a paper presented by Heather Amy Beavers from the Baptist Union on basically the stats and the numbers for women in our union, and they are bleak. They were bleak then, and they are still bleak now. And I was sitting there next to Lyndon listening to this presentation, and he had tears rolling down his face, and he turned around and he said to me at the end of it, Minnie, what more can we do to support you? And I said to him, nothing. Like, my church has always been really supportive and incredible for me. I've always had that, they've always had my back. I've always felt that. And yet I knew that there was something inside me that was holding back. And it came out in these kinds of words. I'm called first to be a wife and a mother, and after that, the rest comes. And at the end of this presentation, I felt God say to me, not audibly, but in my spirit, you would say that Justin is called first to be a husband and a father, and yet you let him work 50 hours a week. What gives? And that was my D-Day with God. It was the end of my first year of pastoral leadership training. I knew I no longer had anywhere to run. I couldn't hide behind my gender anymore. And actually, it was revealed to me in that moment that I was struggling with the fact that I was a woman, and how did I work this out, that I can be a pastor and a woman. So I gave my all to God that day and said, okay, I acknowledge this call that you have placed on my life. I don't understand it. I don't know what it's going to look like. In fact, at that point in year one, I didn't even know if I liked the church. But I acknowledge that I am called. So that brings up the subject of whether or not a woman can be a pastor or be a senior leader. And so the theological terms for that is whether you are egalitarian or whether you are complementarian. And I discovered that I was complementarian, which means that I did not think I had a right to lead. And it was bizarre because it's not what I was ever taught in previous churches. It is not how I was raised. I was raised seeing my father cook in the kitchen just as much as my mother. I was raised seeing my mother contribute and make big decisions just as much as my father. However, I think that we live in a society in New Zealand that is still progressing through this, and society has an impact. Also, a history of the way that we have thought has an impact. And without getting into the big historical roots of why we think that in New Zealand, we did inherit it. It wasn't us. It's not how Māori think. So it's not how the people of this land think. But we inherited it. So with a bit of work and actually a lot of challenging from my lecturers, I realised that I guess it's safeguarding You know what I mean? Like it's a way to be able to say, well, if I can be disqualified from senior leadership because I'm a woman, then I've got a safe road to ride, you know. And I don't have that anymore because I don't believe it's true. I believe thoroughly that women can and should lead. And listening to Owen the other night particularly, because I've known you the longest, Owen, I just about was crying because he's this guy that I love and respect, sharing openly and vulnerably about his own journey with whether or not women can lead. And I was so blessed by what he said and so blessed by what he shared, particularly because it's not that long ago that I felt the same way. So that I'll conclude talking about that by saying I am now very, very passionate about women in leadership. This doesn't mean that I'm a militant feminist. This doesn't mean that I think that women should be above men. It doesn't mean that I think that men are the bad guys, actually. All those things are very commonly held opinions. I believe that God created man and woman equal, that he created us to be partners together, partners in ministry, partners in marriage, partners in life. And I think that when we exclude either one of those genders, that we lose something about the image of God. So, so one of the things that I would absolutely love to be able to do as a pastor in our church is to really encourage the incredible women that I see in our congregation that have got a call of God on their life, perhaps not for pastoring, but for other types of ministry. So, really passionate about that. And I'm really passionate about how our movement sees this particular subject. So that's one thing that I think that God has really placed on my heart. Another thing that I think that God has really placed on my heart is our bicultural journey. So I'll backtrack a little bit again. When I first went into Kerry, so this is prior to Pastoral Leadership Track, this is back in 2014, I got to hear some of our history. And I mean, I can say this without shame now, but it used to really shame me that I was 39 years old, and I had no idea of our true history in this country. Now, it depends who you talk to, right, on how you see that, and there are many people that that find that a really threatening perspective to have, and I get that. But something that I have appreciated about our church is that we have, through Frank, largely at the beginning, I think Frank is the first person I heard speaking on this, I could be wrong, but we have sought to educate, and I am really passionate about that. I don't think it's good enough for us to be ignorant about our history, not just for the entirety of New Zealand, but for our own rohe, for Manarewa. Now, I just want to answer this question of Marcy's before I see it disappear. So Marcy's just saying, after the time you spent on the marae that you shared at church about your experience, has that more culturally aware relation to Māori and non-Māori in and out of ministry, Mogs? Has it made me more culturally aware, Marcy? Absolutely, it really has. I would say I went through a progression. When I first became aware that there was these massive injustices that had been done, I was all over it, like, right, let's do something, let's change things. Let's do stuff in our church, let's help our church build good relationships with the marae. And I was, ask the elders, they'll remember that meeting very clearly. I wanted to march on in there and lead the way. And I have learned over time that that is a little bit of a saviour complex that us Pākehā love to have, and we don't even realise often that we do have it. We think that we're doing the right thing. So Marcy, one of the things it has really made a difference for me is to learn to sit and listen, to not think that I have all the answers, because actually the half of these answers shouldn't even come from us. They should come from tangata whenua. Some simple things are, I want to learn the language eventually, and the jury's out, I think, on whether that's a great idea to do as Pākehā. And the fact that I even consider that it's a question worthwhile considering, should I learn it or not? Does this bring pride to our people or does it not? I think is a little bit of evidence of, I guess, how complex I think the question is. So I don't think a bicultural journey is anything easy. I don't think that there are straight answers for this country or for our church or for our area at all. I think they're very complex, and I think that that answers and ways forward are organic and grow out of the people groups that live in that area. So if I was to pastor at Mandarewa, something that I will be always wanting to create space for is for more discussion. You know, I mean, we're already doing it, but to really facilitate even more discussion around what can we do to empower and provide space for and for ideas to grow out of, for creativity to grow. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm excited about what we're doing already. I think it's really amazing. So that's the first two, and the last thing so these are like, I just call them my three passions. My other passion is community, and what I mean by community is quite broad actually. So our church is having what do we call it? We've had a year, 2 years of really investigating this, and we have benefited hugely from the influence of Dave and Denise Timms and some of their people, and Southwest Baptist, and we've now got, you know, another intentional community in its fledgling stage. How I would see my role in relation to all of that is a little ironic, because I live in the gardens in a very nice house, and you know, in a perfect world we'd all be living in places where people actually really benefit from having us around, but that's not reality. We live here, and I think that there is a place for those of us who are living in communities like mine that are really actually well off and affluent to still be working in our own communities. So I would love to see Mandarewa Baptist actually become really embedded in the community of Mandarewa. And we all know that that's made up of so many different things. There are lots of different cultures. We're a real melting pot of cultures here. There is a lot of different, stages of life. So there are people who are struggling to buy their first home. There are people who have got their home and a rental, and it's just so diverse. And we as a church need to find a diverse way to exist within that community and to relate to that community. We need to reflect the people that are around us, and we need to be looking at what we can do in relation to who we are, because actually this is who Jesus has placed here. You know, it's you and it's me. We live here, and he will use us to work here. So women in leadership, empowering women in leadership, I'm really excited about that. Our bicultural journey, I'm terrified by that and excited by that. I think that's a really massive one. And I think that there is a huge opportunity for the church to support Māori, to reach out to Māori again. And then the third one is community. I don't think it's enough for us to be the people of God and to be isolated from those that we live around. And again, the answers are complex, they're not easy, but they are there to be wrestled with, and that's what I really want to do. So, let me just take a breath. We've talked about call. Perhaps I'll backtrack just a little bit and talk about the call to Mandarewa Baptist, because for me to be engaging in this process with you means that I am acknowledging that I believe God is calling me here. Now, a couple of people have asked me, do I have any reservations about this? And I think it's fair to be honest and say there was a large period of time, a few months last year, where I was really worried that this is not the right thing. Wisdom would sometimes suggest that that leading your own people is difficult. And I agree with that. I think it is. I think that I was worried actually that I'll always be seen as who I was 5 years ago, and God has done a lot in my life and a lot in my heart, and I'm quite different to who I was back then. I guess the other thing that I had reservations about, not just about our church, but about pastoring a church in general, is I was worried the church wasn't relevant anymore. Like, actually not relevant. You know, what are we doing here on a Sunday? Why do we just come and sing a few songs and hear someone speak and then go home again and don't do anything else during the week with each other? And again, God always knows where we're at. And one of the papers I was doing at that time really spoke into that for me. And I learned through this paper to see the role of the church in the kingdom, to realize that, you know, us who meet together at Mandarua Baptist, it's not our idea, right? Like, we didn't wake up one day and go, oh, hey, this would be a great way to spend our Sunday mornings. We're drawn by the Holy Spirit. The people who come to our church, we are drawn by the Spirit together to be a body together. And I believe that firmly. Now, it doesn't mean that church has to look like it has always looked. No, it doesn't. And one of the things that I am really excited about and really interested in is difference. How do we do church differently? How do we preach, for instance, and invite discussion and feedback from those who are listening, so that it's not just you listening to us every week? How do we do that? That's a question that I really want to explore. And I think that we've had such an amazing opportunity throughout lockdown to really think through some of these questions as well. Even the way that we are trying to connect with you, you know, live like this, it's really different. And the way that we've been, you know, Lyndon has had Zoom calls or Zoom rooms after the service. That's really different, but it's sort of engaging in that way of still, you know, let's meet together and let's talk together. And I suspect that in our busy life, normally what happens is we come to church, we worship, maybe it gives us a lift, I hope it does. We listen to a great sermon that, you know, hopefully gives us a challenge, and then we go back out into our weeks, and Sunday is turned off, and Monday through Saturday is where our focus goes. I'm really hoping that after lockdown we don't return to that. And I'm not saying everybody did. Please don't hear judgment in my tone. What I am saying though is that we were busy. And I think, in fact, I don't really know anybody who doesn't often answer with that, you know, how are you? Oh, really busy. We're all busy. We're always busy. So one of the ways that we can look at this interaction with each other and changing up what we do on a Sunday is thinking about that. How do we stop and take more time? And we've got a great opportunity to be thinking about that now. So I'm just going to scroll down here and make sure I have not missed anything. Hey, Katie. Hey, Chris. Hey, Simon. Okay. So I might just stop here for a second and go to some of the questions that were on the video I posted earlier today. So one of the questions was, who will be responsible for what? Now, this document here, I don't know if that's backwards or not. We've named this our co-leadership pastoral model. And in here what we see is what we tried to do. Linda and I sat down together and did this, and it was really cool because I think both of us probably thought that we'd be having to fight for something we loved, you know, but it actually just separated really evenly to what we both felt was our interests, our passions, and actually also what we felt was the other person's passions and strengths as well. So to cut a long story short, you can read this, but there won't be muddied waters of who's responsible for who. There will be various ministries that will be completely reporting to Lyndon, and then there would be various ministries that would be completely reporting to me. Hey, Dave. So some of those things are we would both teach, and we would obviously both lead. Connections would be largely under Lyndon. We're not saying when we're separating this out that he's the only one that would be in charge of connections. It's just that he's the one that makes sure that everything's ticking along. Curation of Sunday would end up probably with me. And again, that doesn't mean that Lyndon and Dave and Lois and Chris wouldn't have input to that. That's not the way our church functions. Actually, it's often done through a team approach, so that will continue. I would be looking after our communities. Lyndon would be looking after our children through Dave. Youth would be under me, but still being looked after by the people who are doing it right now. And so on and so on. So Yeah, and then our lay ministries as well would be separated as well. Now, what we find, or what we think would be really, really good about this is that if you're having an issue with something, you know exactly who you need to talk to. We don't really want our staff or our ministry leaders or anybody in the position where they're like, oh, I have to have a conversation with Lyndon, and then he said I've got to talk to Monique, and then Monique said, no, this is not me, this is Lyndon, I'll come back to you. We don't want to deal with all that, and we don't want you to deal with that, so we're trying really hard to avoid that. So that's one of the documents. Justin, if you're there, could you please bring me some water? So now another document that's really important is this one here. So this is our Code of Ministry Practice for Co-Leadership. This is a big one. So we have created this out of a vacuum almost. There are people who are doing co-leadership in the Baptist Church. Most of them are either, in fact, most of them are husband and wife couples. Yeah, it's okay, babe. You can still be supportive and bring me a drink of water. So we didn't really know how this could work, actually, and we started to think about it. Now, one of the ways that I function is I tend to think about all the worst case scenarios, and then I mitigate them. And it's not a negative thing, it's just the way that I function. So I look at this and go, well, obviously we could have a fight. I mean, that's pretty obvious. We've had fights before, actually. What happens if he gets all the good jobs and I get all the stink jobs? What happens if it's the other way around? What happens if we get stuck in triangle conversations? Thank you. You're such a great assistant. So we sat down and we started to work through that, and not just for our sake, but again for our staff's sake and for the elders' sake and for all of your guys' sake. So some of those things are, I mean, again, I will let you read this because we've put a lot of work in it. But it's things like guidelines for decision making. How do we make decisions if we think differently about stuff? Lyndon and I think very differently about stuff, about lots of stuff, not everything. But there are things that we're like, I just don't agree, and what will happen in those scenarios. So we have some guidelines there. We have some guidelines for how actually we can be united in our leadership, because churches, communities are funny places, and I don't even need to elaborate on that. You just know weird things can happen. So we have some stuff written down there about that and how we can do that with each other and make sure that we are valuing each other's strengths, but also valuing each other's differences. Marcy, just looking at your question, Marcy. I'll come back to that. But I guess the big one here is, how do we work through conflict? Now, that doesn't mean that it'll always be just conflict between Lyndon and I. There's a potential that there'll be conflict between our staff and us. There could be conflict between a staff member and the senior that they have to report to. So we've put in place some guidelines there on how we do those things. And this will be a public document, not just for us, but it'll be for our elders and for our staff and everything. And then what we've put in place is some accountability structures. And there's the normal accountability through eldership, but also through supervision. And I think one of the big ideas that we've got here is that we will commit to having joint supervision together. The benefit of this is it provides a place where we're able to say, with the support of a third person, hey, I'm not really happy with how this is working. We need to talk about X, Y, Z. So I think that's a really great thing. And then there's some stuff there around communication, and the sustainability aspect of this is really important too. It'll be up for review. So if this vote goes through, the whole co-leadership model itself will be reviewed by staff and will be reviewed by the elders. We're going to look at what's working well, and we're going to look at what's falling apart and make changes as necessary. So we're calling these living documents. We've tried our hardest to put in as much as we can at the moment, but without the experience and without walking that path day by day, it's a bit difficult. So I do encourage you, go and have a look at those documents and read them, because they will answer quite a few questions that I'm hearing going around at the moment. Sharon, I'm just going to touch on this question briefly because we did talk about it last night, but the the whole question of the fact that we have a fairly small church and a full-time pastor, and why do we need someone else? It's a good question, and a question that we value being asked. So Lyndon is really keen to drop hours. He has some dreams of stuff that he wants to do in the community. I'm not going to fill those in for you because that's his dream. And to do that, he needs some time. So yeah, so he's keen to drop some hours. So he's not going to be, if I am hired, he's not going to be full-time. He's going to drop down to 30 hours at this stage. And so this will release him to be able to do some stuff in the community that he's really keen to do. And you would not be hiring me full-time, you'd be taking me on part-time. So between the two of us, you'd have a pastor that would be working 50 hours a week. So it's 10 more hours than a full-time role. Now, Marcy, you asked, have I had any experience working with people with disabilities in ministry and in the general community? Oh, such a good question. And I have so much to learn about this, Marcy, but I think perhaps something that may be helpful is to know when I was about 10 or 11 years old, we met a guy called Robbie. And those of you who have been friends with me will know who I'm talking about. Robbie has Down syndrome. And he used to come and stay at my house heaps. We were his, the family that he would come to so that his parents would have respite care. And he's still in our life today. He's 40 this year. And we just love him. He comes away with us every Christmas, not just my family, but my extended family. He comes away with us every Christmas and every Easter. And he's really a part of us. And I think for me growing up with him, I have been through a lot of different stages of trying to understand what life is like for him, but also my own responses to him, because, they haven't always been positive. There's been frustration. But today, to see my kids just absolutely love him and him be so great with my kids, and the relationship that we have now as adults has been really cool. So that's probably, honestly, the extent of the experience that I have with disability. So I still have lots to learn, Marcy. And of course, there's you, but I don't know you perfectly well either. So, what else is here? Okay, a couple of people asked me what I am most excited about. That's a weird question for a prospective pastor. I think I'm quite a serious person often, and I'm a deep thinker, so I don't go into anything naively if I can help it, and I wish I could. It would probably make me a much more bouncier, happier, cheerful person to be around, but that's not who I am. So I think the word excited is probably not one I would use. I am not thoroughly excited in a giddy sense about this, but I am really looking forward to it, and I am feeling really positive about it. So when I say I'm not giddy excited, it's just that pastoring is not the kind of job, I think I've heard it said like this: if you wanted to have a job where people liked you, you'd sell ice cream. and although it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, it's also a little bit true. I think I was saying to my physio today that with pastoring, you are often dealing with people's crises, and it hurts. And it probably is an important thing for me to note that I'm not going to be the kind of leader who pretends to have it all together for you. I do not have it all together. I never have, and I can't see it happening anytime soon. Today is a classic example. Knowing that I had to do this and connect with you guys where I can't see your faces, it was starting to make me really nervous. And I thought, well, I can tough it up and try and hide this, or I can just let you guys know how I'm feeling so that you can work with me. And so I did. That's probably I can't think of the words, but that's probably characteristic of the type of leader that I'm going to be. And part of that is because of the type of person that I am. Part of it's because I'm a woman. I don't know, I don't care. It's different, and it's different to what I think we're used to, and I think it's really good, and that we have heaps that we can benefit from that. So to go back to the question, I think our church is uniquely situated in Manurewa to be able to do lots of stuff. I don't mean programmatically. I don't mean we can have hundreds of programs going. I mean that our church, when you look around our church on a Sunday morning, we're made up of so many different types of people, different ages, different stages of life, different cultures, like we talked about before. What all of those people are able to do, what us as a group of people are able to do within our community is phenomenal. Like, we can actually reach all of those people in Mandarua. We can reach different cultures. We can reach different ages and stages. We can reach people at different levels of health, whether they are physically, well or not, whether they are mentally well or not. And I don't know about you guys, but I have lived here for a very long time. In fact, I grew up here before I moved back. So I've been here since, I think I was about 3 years old until I was 11, and then I moved back when I was 23, and I haven't left. This feels like home. And I recently discovered, I think it was last year actually, that my father's family, whakapapa's back to Mandarua for, I think my kids are the 5th generation. They farmed the land here. I was just like, wow, that's amazing, because I don't think it's just that I'm not a traveller, but I've never felt a draw to leave here. I've never felt a draw to be anywhere else. This is home for us, and I am really thrilled that I have this opportunity to be able to live and work and serve in my own community amongst people that I love here. So I think that's really cool. Now I am excited about this. I'm excited about co-pastoring. And I talked about this a little bit last night, but Baptist theology says that one of the things that makes us unique is to be wrestling with each other. So we read the word together and we let the word read us. Now, if I just read the Bible by myself, I will always probably read it the way that I always have, and I won't think differently about it. If I sit down with Marcy, for instance, who is blind, and read the Bible with her, I am going to see different things out of it. If I sit down with Sean and I read it with him, who is in a wheelchair, he is going to show me different things in it. If I sit down with a different culture, they read the word very differently. So if you have this, that we have this possibility, this opportunity to have two leaders who are very different, who are thinking differently to each other in some ways, who are passionate about slightly different things, wrestling together and reading the word together, we get to start modeling and demonstrating this really key thing, characteristic about what makes us Baptist. And maybe that turns you off a little bit, like, the whole Baptist thing, and I get that. I think even when Lyndon had started working for us, he was like, oh, you're going to love it when you do Baptist history. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't think of anything worse. And I don't care if we're Baptist, it's just church. Anyway, he was right. I really loved that paper, because Baptist history is amazing. But we're going to do some stuff on that at church later on at some point, so I'm not going to bang on about it now. Right, I have done that. So Dave popped on and gave me a couple of questions, and they're really big questions. I'm not sure if he's just trying to trick me into trying to answer them or not, but here we go, we'll give it a go. So Dave has asked, what role do I see myself and our church playing with the injustice that is present in New Zealand? In one sense, the answer is a very small role, and why I say a small role is because I think it's made up of a whole bunch of small decisions and small pockets of people choosing to live differently, and we happen to be one of those. So we are a small pocket in Mandarua that we can choose to stand up against injustice. It's really hard to think about really big stuff that we can do, but I find it easy to think about the little things. And they're things like this for me. So some of the injustices that happen is this gap between, Dave Timms, is this gap between our rich and our poor. If we're living a really privileged lifestyle, how can we help bring about justice in that, or work against an injustice between that? I find it really overwhelming, I've got to be honest with you. I find it really threatening. It's tricky, and I think that it's easy for us to sit in a position and say, well, God has just called me to do this thing and I don't need to worry about the rest of it. Does not seem to be how Scripture plays out. We do have to care. He's called us to care. So I think my role with injustice is going to be to do what is presented in front of me. One of the things that I'm really keen to do is to get involved with Alfriston College. Now my son goes there. As far as I know, no one from our church is currently working there. And one of the things that came out via our email today is that or yesterday I think, is that they're requiring all of the students to now have to have a device since COVID-19, citing health and safety stuff, which is really cool. However, my first thought is, how on earth are these people going to afford this? And they've put down 2 companies that parents can go to get a loan. And I'm going to have a look at it and see if I think that those companies are good or not. Like, are they sharks or are they legit places? It's little things like that. And I know in one sense it feels like it's not a big deal, right? But what if I'm the only person who goes to the school and questions their decision here? If I didn't say anything, perhaps nobody else will. That's the role that I feel like I have. What role does our church have with New Zealand injustice? If we're talking about injustices, historical injustices like our bicultural stuff, I think one of the big roles that we have as a church is to educate. So it's easy to be ignorant. It's easy to not want to know what's happened. You could have knocked me over with a feather when I first learned at around 39 years old that Te Reo Māori as a language had been outlawed in this country in schools and that kids were punished for it. I had no idea. I instead had grown up, not just from like my family, but actually from the news and the media. I had grown up with this kōrero that actually they just died out. So now why are we trying to put all this effort into relearning it? Very, very humbling to know that something that you've believed has been convenient to believe, and that now you have to change your entire worldview on it. It's things like that. I think our church has a role to educate and to be really honest about our history, even down to let's be really honest and find out the history of the land that our buildings sit on. Hard stuff, man, really hard stuff to engage with, but being ignorant and saying, well, we don't know is not good enough. I think we can work with other things with injustice as well, as and when they arise. And I am struggling to think of stuff off the top of my head, Dave, so I know when you watch this later you're going to have a bit of a giggle. But I think the big thing really is this thing of not shying away. Just because something's too big doesn't mean that we don't wrestle with it. Just because it's too overwhelming doesn't mean that we don't sit down and work out what we can and can't do about it. And maybe sometimes the only thing we can do about it is to pray. But prayer is powerful and it aligns our hearts with the Father's, and then He motivates us to do stuff, and sometimes it's really surprising. So that's... Oh, Dave asked another question. Dave Timms, what does the good news of Jesus Christ mean to New Zealand today, especially with this massive predicted recession that we've got coming up, and how that's going to impact not just our church, but Manurewa? Man, I don't know. I am not political. I'm not politically minded. I try to engage with it, but it's not how I'm wired, so I've got some learning to do there. And I'm not really financially minded. That's my husband's department. But I think what the good news of Jesus means in that no matter what happens politically or financially is that we are called to live in a particular way in this country, and not just New Zealand, I mean in this land. So because we are God's kids, if we're really going to make it really simple, because we are His kids, we need to live and move and breathe with His characteristics. Those characteristics are to love our neighbours as ourselves. They are to have compassion on the poor. They are to put other people's needs before our own. And things like that. So decisions that we make need to be filtered through some of that stuff. For me right now, buying locally is important. The hospitality industry has obviously been hit very hard, along with lots of others. So it's looking at the places that we have our leisure and our entertainment and trying to bring them in as local as we can to support the community that we live in. So the good news of Jesus makes right everything that is not right. That's basically what it is. It takes away the things that are sad and makes them happy again. In one sense, it's not here yet, and it's still coming. But actually, I preached a few weeks ago about the fact that we are God's billboard, and I really believe that, and I love that phrase, like that we're his billboard. And so we are the advertisement, we're God's advertisement in the world, that he is going to do everything that he promised he would do. And he promised that he is going to make everything right that is not right. Our role is to get on board with that. Sometimes it's going to hurt us personally. And sometimes it's not going to be comfortable. Sometimes it's scary. But that's where I think community comes in. So by community, I mean our church whānau. We are living together. We are working together. We are playing together. We should be challenging each other. We don't do this in New Zealand. It's almost taboo, isn't it? Like, you know, you live your life, I'll live my life, and don't speak into my life because you don't have any right to. And maybe there's one or two people that we give that special permission to speak into our lives. I don't think that's how Jesus ever intended his church to function. But that is very countercultural as well, isn't it? So we need to press into that a little bit more too. I think I have I've definitely come to the end of the questions that I have down here. So I'll just take a brief pause and see if anybody has any more questions, and then we'll go from there. It's really nice that so many of you came out, especially on a Friday night. Can someone tell me what the time is? Because I can't see that again on the screen. I didn't anticipate that. $7:50. Okay, cool. We are coming close to the end of it. My gosh, I did not think I was going to be able to talk for an hour. My husband will be laughing at me now. No, Friday nights are definitely not what they used to be. All right, family. Well, I think I will finish it there. Feel free after this, you know, if you go away from this and you're chewing on some of the stuff that I've been talking about and you want to ask more questions, feel free to ask. Before we go, I just want to touch on one more thing because it might be the last chance I get to do this via a video. Obviously, there's this awkward situation for you guys where what happens if we don't vote her in? Yeah, that's an absolute possibility. Absolute possibility. And that's okay. You know, this is church and I know it's not personal, so please don't be stressy about that and don't be worried for me about that. I have already worked through that stuff and I'm okay about it. I'm obviously nervous. This is a really big deal, and going through a court process is a really big deal in itself. So for those of you who have been checking in with me to see how I am, I really appreciate it, and I really, really appreciate so many of you coming out to listen to me tonight. Honestly, I'm really blessed, and I hope that it's been good for you. And we will continue to engage over the next couple of weeks until we get to the point of having a vote. Oh, Lyndon, what are you asking? What would you ask of us as a church to support you in a ministry? Oh, in ministry. Well, okay, the real big one, the obvious one is kids. So, while I'm only aiming to work 20 hours a week, that's my plan, there's going to be times in crises where it's just going to blow out, I think. Knowing that there are, you know, one or two people that I can call to pick up my kids after school if it's really needed that day, that would be amazing. Other than that, I think just the same as any other family. All right. Well, bless you all. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday night. See, the night's still young. You can still go out and party. Otherwise, I will see you on Sunday with the message.